Plastic bars tryna copy my steel. Copy my steel. Face the fact that ain't no cap, I'm real.
And welcome back
Ain't no
to
cap,
the
I'm
Early
real.
Bird Special. I'm Chris Burdick. With me, as always, my co-host Sparky. And once again, it is time to wreck your waiver wire, Week 9. Now, me and Sparky were talking about this off camera here. It is starting to get a little thin. We understand. And it is, if you're looking for the waiver wire, you're looking through the waiver wire. But most of you, if you're already in a spot to be in the playoffs in your leagues, you're really not looking for a lot of people to move. So we are running a little thin on players themselves to, help you guys out with. But we do have a handful for you this week. But to start out, we have a whole bunch going on in the NFL this week. Just starting out today, really, Spark. The biggest story that I've seen come out so far, Antony Richardson of the Colts being benched for Joe Flacco, the veteran. This coming after Anthony last week decided to tap out for a play on third down, a crucial third down against the Houston Texans in a game that could have given the Colts the lead in their division. First off, let's talk about Anthony Richardson tapping out as a starting quarterback, and then we'll move into the benching. But what are your thoughts on that, my guy?
I'm tired. I mean, what kind of quarterback? Jeez Louise. I mean, I'm not a fan of the guy, first of all. Not only just because I think he's played maybe 9 or 10 games in a couple years.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know if I would say he's injury prone, but I just don't think his style, whether it fits in the offense with the Colts, which, has been up and down for the last couple of years, or it just doesn't transform into the NFL. So I'm not 100% sure. The kid has a cannon, but he's got happy feet. So I mean,
Right.
I'm not a big fan of his. And when you have somebody like Flacco just waiting at the bit, it was kind of an easy call. I think it's probably a week or two late, but good luck for them. I was kind of surprised when he took himself out. I was actually watching that game live when he did it, and he was tapping his head. I thought he was injured. And then I saw the post game where he was, I was just tired. I'm like, I would have probably not said that out in public, but now you're sitting on the bench, bro.
And you know what? Watching McAfee as much as I do, and obviously he's a diehard Colt supporter and all Indiana sports supporter, and they made a really good points about this as well. That one, you just don't do this. You do not do this as a starting quarterback in the NFL. You do not leave. If anything, you are the guy with the most endurance on the field because you're the starting quarterback. You're the leader of the team. You don't go anywhere. But the way he handled this, the way he talked to the media afterwards, where he was expecting a pop when he said that. He's like, oh, I was just tired. Like he literally was waiting for the media to laugh and not a single person broke. And then that's when he realized, I think, I messed up. I should not have done this. This was a young mistake. I think I agree with you. He's a prototype. He's a prototypical guy, but there's not a whole ton of guys that are like him. Yeah, he's got a cannon for an arm, and he has success on offense. But realistically speaking, we have yet to see his style of offense actually pan out in the NFL. And he even said that in the media after the game as well. He was saying that not a lot of guys play quarterback like him. He plays like he's the best runner outside of Lamar. That's probably arguably factual, but realistically speaking, at the end of the day, if it's not successful, it's not successful. And the Colts are a team that they're not looking to rebuild right now. They got plenty on that offensive side to be successful. So I am not surprised by the move to bench him. Now, whether this is a long-term benching or just they're, penalizing him for the way he handled the situation this past week, like they would a college player, we're up in the air. It's only his second year, but this is the second quarterback in that draft class from last year to be benched this year, along with Bryce Young. The only one that seems to be working out is C.J. Stroud, and we all know that ain't going to change anytime soon. So
Speaking of Stroud, I mean, he looks like he just lost another receiver this year.
Yeah, that's
the Hopkins, or not the Stephon Diggs news this morning.
And I think everybody was kind of worried about that to begin with. This was a non-contact injury, but Stephon Diggs, arguably, I mean, probably the more well-known receiver in this room. I wouldn't say he's the wide receiver one, though, on this team. I still think that goes down to either Tank Dell or Nico. But Stephon, definitely a big, big piece for this Houston Texans. Will be gone for the rest of the year after he tore his ACL in this game against the Colts. sad to see a man go down like this, but I think if anybody is a fan of Stephon Diggs and knows how this guy plays, he'll most likely bounce back and be as as useful as he always is next year. So especially if he sticks around in Houston. So, what do you feel about this, Sparky?
I mean that's a big loss. Luckily, they're expecting Nico back here in a couple weeks. So I haven't looked at their schedule for the next couple weeks, but I mean, Stephon is a good receiver for a veteran receiver, but he wasn't a big piece of that offense. I think when you have a quarterback like Stroud and he's surrounded by talent. Mixon has stepped up his game the last couple weeks, and I mean they'll definitely miss him as a wide receiver 3. But I think with Nico expected to be back by week 10, I think they'll be fine.
And you know what? The first name that popped up that I kept hearing after the news came out about Stephon was Diontae Johnson out in the Carolina area. And he has been moved, but unfortunately for Houston, he's been moved somewhere else. That's the last talking point we're going to get into before we get to our picks this week. But Johnson is headed to the Ravens to join Lamar in that offense. Personally, I don't see this as that big of a deal. I know Johnson had his high times in Pittsburgh, but seeing it as the guy really has not stepped up as a wide receiver one and I mean, again, Carolina Panthers, it's hard to argue that that's an easy spot for a receiver to come in and be as successful as he was. But realistically speaking, I don't think this is that big of a trade in terms of excelling the Baltimore Ravens in the pass game. I think they would have been better off probably trading for a guy like DeAndre Hopkins or somehow figuring out that trade for Adams last week before they sent him to the Jets. So personally, I think this is a solid trade. Don't get me wrong, but I still think Zay Jones is a better receiver than Johnson. So I don't see this being as big of an upgrade as people are making it out to be in the media. But what say you?
I agree. I mean, stat wise, I think he's had maybe one like 100-yard game this season, which I know he's in Carolina, but I know when Andy Dalton was under center, and I mean I think that was the game he went off, was one of the first games with the new quarterback. Bryce Young looked like shit last week, so I'm not sure if this is just a sell. Let's get rid of anybody we can get anything out of. But I mean, for a 6th-round draft pick, I mean, it's easy to take that chance, especially when you're a team like the Ravens that really don't need another receiver. But I mean, the more weapons you can put around that offense, it's only going to help players like Derrick Henry. So I mean, it's an easy trade to make when you're only giving up a 6th-rounder and you're adding a veteran like that. And I think we still have a little over a week until the deadline.
Yes,
So
deadline
I'm
is
surprised to see what other players are on this firing shot.
Yeah, deadline is actually election day for people who don't know, which is going to be a very interesting day in the world of America. But realistically speaking, I have to agree with you. I don't see this being that big of a deal. But Johnson's going to make a big splash in that offense. Don't get me wrong. He's still going to make his plays. I just don't see him being the number one guy out in Baltimore, especially when you got guys like Zay Jones and Derrick Henry who have been thriving in this offense so far this year.
I mean, but fantasy wise, does that hurt people that picked up Bateman last week?
You know what? A little bit. And actually, I would be, if you listen to me, then obviously you'd probably have Bateman on your team right now, and that will take away a lot of targets from Bateman, unfortunately. But because Bateman knows the playbook and all that, he's still going to get his opportunities. Don't think Johnson's just going to come in here and take people's jobs. He's going to have to earn it just like everybody else, and he's going to have to earn that chemistry that so many of these receivers and tight ends have had to work for with Lamar. And honestly, it's not just going to come right out of the gate. It's going to come in a couple weeks. Johnson will make a splash, but I don't expect him to be amazing until probably about 2-3 weeks in. But yeah, in terms of being a Bateman owner, it may be time to fish or cut bait now, unfortunately, because I'm not gonna lie to you. A lot of these talking points today kind of ruined some of my pickups because I had to scratch out a handful of these. I'm going to tell you right now. Now that Joe Flacco is at quarterback for the Colts, I'm back on the Michael Pittman train. This kid is a great receiver when he has a good quarterback throwing to him. So if you were a Michael Pittman owner, start him this week. You will get your points back. I promise you that. But getting into those picks, Sparky, we got a handful here for the people who are listening still. Let's start at quarterback, man. Personally, one of my big pickups this week is going to be Matthew Stafford. If you have a chance to pick him up, about 50% of the people roster him in their leagues right now. But with Puka Nacua and his boy Cooper Kupp coming back fully healthy this week, I personally believe he's going to come back thriving. Last week in Thursday Night Football, 279 yards, 4 touchdowns against a very, very good Vikings defense. Just bodes well for the Rams, and I think they're going to pick it up this week against the Seattle Seahawks.
And that's going to be a tough one, but I think when you have Puka and your number one receiver with Cooper Kupp back in the lineup, he looked like the old Matt Stafford. So, I mean, that's easy to I mean, if Stafford is still available, which when in a lot of my leagues he is.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh man, I should have pulled the trigger right before kickoff when I knew he was going to have a good game, but I didn't. And now I'm playing the waiver wire. Another one is that Flacco. I think Flacco, they are playing the Vikings. So and the Vikings have lost, 2 in a row. So I wouldn't be too shocked if Minnesota just plays that blitz all day. And Flores plays that zero blitz and kind of makes a tough game for Flacco. But another guy that I'm looking at is Derek Carr, who's just coming off of an injury. He was been out for 3-4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was seeing only 10%. So a lot of people had cut him. Obviously, he started out real hot, and the Saints have kind of gone downhill since. But I will say they're playing the Carolina Panthers. So if you're needing a quarterback this week, I wouldn't be steering away from Derek Carr and the Saints. That guy is the one that makes that offense run. So if you can't pick up Stafford, because I would definitely ride that Stafford train as long as I could. I know Seattle's defense isn't a pushover, but when you got Puka and Kupp, you know what I mean? It's kind of difficult to walk away from. But I like Carr in this matchup. If you're one of these guys that are playing the matchup to matchup, in a couple of my leagues, I've got Mahomes on my bench and Aaron Rodgers, and I'm ready to throw my hands up and just go with Stafford. So I don't know when that. I mean, I know Mahomes threw 2 touchdowns last week, which was his first 2 touchdowns in the month of October, and Rodgers just looks like garbage. So I'm steering away from those guys. Ideally, if I had to number them, I would go Stafford 1, maybe Flacco 2, and then Carr 3.
See, I like your Derek Carr pickup, though, because if you're a Derek Carr fan and you followed his career, he is a notorious second half player. He does so much better in the second half of seasons, and he does not throw a lot of interceptions on the latter half of the season, which is why usually his teams get at least a shot at the playoff spots. But because the Saints are so dwindled, that's what kind of steers me away from that a little bit as well. So I see why you would say probably Stafford and Flacco a little bit more likely to be able to be picked up. Going into the running back position here, Spark. Now, this is going to be thin because I'm not going to lie to you. If you don't have a good running back position right by now, you're not going to find it. You could find guys that'll probably pick up, a handful of carries here and there behind their main guys, like this guy that I'm going to tell you right now, because I personally love this kid. I love watching him play every single week as a Falcons fan. But Tyler Algier, probably the best backup running back in my opinion in the league. He is a bulldozer. He gets about 12 carries a game. This kid makes do with every single one. He will get you your points. He will get you your yards. Now, granted, he doesn't break out for those big, 20, 30-point games very often. He did against the Carolina Panthers this week, but that's pretty much the only time he has. But he's a reliable backup running back if you're looking for something that maybe you got a guy on a bye week and you just need 5-6 points, something to put you over the edge. Tyler could be that guy this week going against a dwindled Dallas Cowboys defense, who I don't think is going to do very well against this run offense of Atlanta.
No, I totally agree. I like Algier. The other one I like is Tyrone Tracy over with the Giants. We've talked about him for weeks, but the longer, if you haven't picked him up by now, this guy has made that running back 1 easily changed for the Giants into ball. But, I mean, 2 times in the last 4 weeks, I believe he's had 140 yards on the ground, and he's just leapfrogged Devin Singletary, and I liked Singletary in the beginning of the season, but I think Tracy's really just been a better runner. He runs angry, and you never know when he can bust out, a 50-yard run. So, I mean, if you can, which is going to be difficult, especially with fantasy, it's hard to get a running back that will fit, especially after the draft. If you got lucky and picked up, somebody like who was it, Kareem Hunt, that's actually been scoring, 2 touchdowns a week in October. I think Tracy's probably the next man up in fantasy if you can find him on the waivers.
Tracy's a good pickup. I picked him up in one of my leagues a couple weeks ago, and he's actually been a solid pick. Because I lost Travis Etienne for a couple of weeks, and he's been a pretty good fill-in. So I love that pickup as well. One running back though that I'm gonna tell you either drop or steer away from for the foreseeable future. Jerome Ford. Cleveland fans know this. He's been hurt for the last 2 weeks. I understand, but with Nick Chubb coming back fully healthy and holding about 70% of the carries for Cleveland, even if Ford comes back, you're not going to get a lot of production out of him. It's going to be Nick Chubb's rock going forward. So personally, if you are a Ford fan or at least a Ford owner, you should most likely move off of him and try to pick up either Tracy or Algier, because you're probably more likely to get something out of them instead.
And I can't believe we didn't say Winston.
You know what? I give him kudos for taking out the Ravens last week. I will give Jameis his kudos. Being a Falcons fan, I am not a Jameis Winston fan. Obviously, he was drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and was there for quite some time. All the boy needed was LASIK surgery, apparently, to become a good quarterback. Lo and behold, you need good eyes to play quarterback. Who knew? But, Jameis is Jameis. Jameis is a beautiful human being, I realize, and I do not fault him as a personal person. But personally, I do not think you should touch anything Cleveland necessarily outside of some wide receivers, which we're actually going to get to, Sparky.
Well, before you move on to receiver, because
you got another one for me?
You brought up that move with Ford, and I'm on the fence with Chubb. I love Chubb. He's a badass. But if he was to play for any other team except the Browns, I would be on it. But personally, I haven't started him since he's came back, and luckily I haven't, because it's been under 10 points both weeks. I know they had a big game over at Baltimore, and I'm still on the fence. I don't know if Winston, that was just they didn't have any tape on him with Cleveland, or I'm going to give him one more week on my bench and see if he is going to be the Chubb that we expect. But I can't trust Winston. So I don't think Winston's a 300-yard a week type quarterback. And I mean, that was a hell of a win. Trust me, I had to double check. I'm like, what was Cleveland going to win this game? And that was kind of a question I was going to ask you, because I know I was about to drop his ass this week, and you're like, don't do that. So
I don't like the idea of dropping Chubb, because his high ceiling, it makes up for anything. And realistically speaking, you have to think and take into account he's coming off a very serious injury. He's only played 2 weeks. He had no time to prep. And realistically speaking, he played against the Baltimore Ravens, who are one of the better defenses in the league. So I don't fault Chubb. I'm a Chubb owner as well. I have him in a couple leagues. I've been waiting for this moment. I really have, for him to come off the injury. And I'm waiting for that real breakout game. I'm not sure if it's going to be this week, but you give it a couple. Or I know if you feel like dropping him, go ahead and drop him. But personally, I'm going to ride with Nick Chubb from here until I die, because that boy is absolutely.
I love the guy. I just don't like the Browns.
And I get that.
Home against the Chargers this week, so.
And that's a tough defense to go against as well. And actually, that's why I'm going to move. If we're good, I'm going to move into our receivers, because that's my first receivers to look at. Cedric Tillman for Cleveland. So now, much like the Giants, I'm going to explain this. The Giants are a terrible, terrible football team. Okay? They are not led by a great quarterback.
No.
However, they have players in fantasy football, much like Tracy, Wan'Dale Robinson. You got your neighbors. They are going to produce for you. And personally, I think Cedric is going to be one of those guys now that Cleveland is looking for their for sure number one guy. Between him and Elijah Moore, it's going to be one of those two. But so far in the last 2 weeks, it's looked like it's going to be Tillman. Kid's had 15 catches, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. You can do a lot worse, in my opinion, at the wide receiver position.
Well, I don't have much with it, but I'm going to throw out a wild card. I'm going to throw out Parker Washington. and you say, what? Who? Exactly, because somebody's got to catch passes for the Jaguars. And now with Christian Kirk out for the season, and it looks like Robinson is probably, or Thomas Jr. is probably going to be out at least a week or two. Um, I'm not a fan of the Jaguars, and I'm not a fan of Trevor Lawrence, but they're going to throw 50 times, and they're playing the Eagles, which you could say the Eagles of past is usually a good defense, but Philly gives up a lot of points. And I really think if the Jaguars don't show some type of improvement in the next couple of weeks, they might be looking for another coach again, and that'll be what, coach number 3 under Trevor Lawrence. So, I mean, he's got a history, and he just got paid, so he's not going anywhere. So, just remind, highlight this Parker Washington, because if you don't know him, you might know him after this week. If you're deep with a big bench and you maybe had Christian Kirk, that might be the best you can find, unless you can, somebody like Burdick just brought up, because I don't know who the hell that is either. But I don't watch a lot of Giants games. Luckily, that Monday night game, there was a World Series game and Monday Night Raw during the same time, so I was like flipping back and forth.
Well, Cedric is in Cleveland, so regardless, it's all the same. I mean, it's a good point you made there, because with receivers, it's a hit and miss thing. You got to have a good quarterback throwing them the ball. So if he can get the ball, that is the way it is. I personally think Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback. I don't think a lot of the league does anymore, but that's just, we're going to have to see. I would hate to see them actually fire their coach at this point, though, because with Jacksonville being the way they were, it would be really interesting, at least in my opinion, to see them dive down so harshly after that just terrible playoff loss to the Chargers a few years ago, because that's where all of this really started. They have not been able to come back from that at all, and it's pretty sad to see. One receiver, though, that I am going to tell you drop, and I hate saying this. I've said it twice now this year. I love this kid, and I really wish there could be a better thing for him. But Rome Odunze in Chicago, dude, I don't get it. I don't. The chemistry is there between him and Caleb. I don't get why. I get that Keenan Allen is much more of a reliable receiver, so I get their relationship. DJ Moore, though, is more of a hit and miss type of a guy as well. But Rome has not produced at all during the season. He's had one good game out of that. I mean, he's had 2 games with 5 catches, and we're, 8, 7 games into the season, and most of his games have been 2 to 1 catch. So realistically speaking, it may take a year, I guess, for Rome Odunze to really figure it out for the NFL. But personally, it's time. Drop him. Don't go anywhere near this boy, at least until Chicago puts him at the wide receiver 2.
I've had him 3 different times this season.
I have too. I'm
looking at the waivers. I look at the waivers like Sunday morning. I'm like, why do I have this motherfucker? And this last week I benched him for Keon Coleman from Buffalo, and surprising, I mean, he had a hell of a game this week. Of course, it was on my bench, and but I mean, I think almost like what we talked about last week with all the other trades that were going on with Hopkins, which I didn't see if Hopkins did anything in that Kansas City game, but I know Amari Cooper looks good in Buffalo, but it has opened up the option with Keon Coleman, and I think that was a missing part for Buffalo. Yeah, they weren't playing the toughest team this last week, but I think Keon had 130, 140 yards this last week.
Did he really? So, I missed this game, so I was unaware of that.
I believe he had 8 receptions, 139 yards or something like that. And, I think now that, a rookie receiver that was lined up at wide receiver 1 with Diggs gone, I think adding somebody like Amari Cooper just helped that kid. Now he's a wide receiver 2. He's going up against, he's not doubled up. And it opened up some wide open passes for Josh Allen. So I hate the fucking Bills. And every Sunday when I double check my roster, I said, I'm not going with Coleman, but it might be a little easier now. And they're playing Miami this week. So I know Jalen Ramsey will be blanketed, Amari Cooper. So it might open up some opportunities for Keon Coleman.
I have seen his name thrown around a lot this week in terms of people looking for waivers. So Keon could be a solid choice. I mean, it's about time, in my personal opinion. He's arguably one of the better receivers in this draft class, but we will see what we will see. Going into tight ends, and it's criminal of me being a former tight end and not realizing it was National Tight End Day on
Oh my
Sunday.
God.
Now, finally, finally, we got production. Finally, we got
I don't know how
production
many
in
times I've
fantasy
heard
wise
that
from
during
tight
the
ends.
games.
Homie, we got two touchdowns from Kyle Pitts. Two. And they were big ones.
One of them looked like a fumble to me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. One of them was damn near a fumble, but it is what it is. We can move on from that. It's okay. But National Tight End Day was last Sunday, and luckily it is moving forward into hopefully better days for tight ends, or at least production-wise in fantasy football. My major tight ends to look at this week, I got two for you. One of them is Cade Otton. This one is obvious. I mean, everybody's been talking about this kid, and only 46% of you have actually been smart enough to pick him up in your league. And if you haven't yet, what are you waiting for? This kid has 17 catches, 181 yards, and 2 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. He has broken his career high in catches literally the last 2 weeks in a row. He is absolutely the only option in Tampa Bay right now outside of the running backs. Now, mind you, Baker Mayfield is the highest throw to running back percentage in all of the league this year. So that is something to take into account if you're a white owner, the Tampa Bay running back owner. However, Cade Otton seems to be the number one guy in terms of who he's going to throw to outside of that, and I don't see that ending anytime soon. What say you, Sparky?
I mean, that's a hell of a pick. He's gone in most of my leagues. I picked up, I followed my own advice a couple weeks ago and picked up Tucker Kraft, and it was probably the best pickup I've had this season. So if you are fishing for a tight end, and thank God this last week, Kelsey finally fucking showed up. And
Well, he played the
tight
Raiders.
end day, of course, because I heard it 50 times during the Dolphin game. And of
And
course,
yet,
it was Mark Schlereth, a former tight end, that was the announcer for the Dolphin game. So I think I heard it 50 more times than I needed to. But if you're fishing for a tight end, I mean, there's a lot of them that are right on the bubble. If there's not the the Otten or the Tucker Crafts that have been solid pickups at the tight end position this season. The other one, I'm going to piggyback with Derek Carr back. It might be a good time for Taysom Hill to kind of give you an option for a week. I would stay the fuck away from Hunter Henry, because I looked at him and I was like, okay, well, this was been, Drake May's number one guy to throw to. And then, of course, Drake May leaves the game with an injury, and Jacoby Brissett. I mean, good for him. He beat the Jets, but it looks like the Jets are beating the Jets just like the Dolphins are beating the Dolphins. But going back to the tight end, if you don't have, Otten, which I snagged him 2-3 weeks ago because he was wide receiver or tight end one in Tampa. I mean, he was getting 10, 12, targets a game. So the other one is Taysom Hill. He came back this last week and had 12 targets himself. And I think it's only going to go up now with with Carr coming back.
so I got one more tight end for you, Sparky, if you're hurting there with Hunter Henry that you could probably ditch. And honestly, I didn't see this guy coming, although I love this guy, and he has been an absolute stud at tight end since he's been in the league. But Zach Ertz out in Washington. So I've had Zach on my team because I picked him up as a backup a couple weeks ago, very early in the season. Didn't have a good backup tight end. Figured Zach Ertz would be a solid one, especially since I personally have this rule. But rookie quarterbacks love their tight end. Absolutely love him. It's usually the number one pick that they throw to almost every game. And Zach Ertz is no exception playing with Jaden Daniels. He has had 14 points in the last 2 weeks alone, 10 the week before that, all against really, really good defenses. And honestly, this past week against the Chicago Bears, he had 11 targets. And like I said, and I could point out with a lot of these other guys, if you're sitting there with somebody who's been floundering for you, but you just can't seem to let go, you could do better. There are higher ceilings, and you don't have to have the number one guy. You could just have to have a guy that'll put more points up than the guy that you have on your roster right now. And honestly, I think Zach Ertz being the number 10 tight end in the league right now could probably help out a lot of people on their rosters, since, I mean, shoot, only 30% of you actually have him rostered right now. And then my last one to mention this week, it's actually a drop and stay away from. And I'm saying drop these guys because I don't see this defense catching back up. But the Seattle Seahawks defense this week, personally, I say stay away. They're taking on the Los Angeles Rams. And like we said earlier, to start this off, Matthew Stafford with his offense back. But this defense has been absolutely torched the last 4 weeks in a row, at least. 3 of the games, 400 yards given up to offenses. And honestly, it's really starting to look like the Seattle Seahawks are starting to spiral down, especially with a lot of these injuries. So personally, if you still have Seattle on your roster, I say try to ditch them now and pick up somebody that maybe you could pick up late in that Cleveland's defense or something that seems a little more on the nose and could get you a little more points.
Yeah, defense, my last pick. Defense have been a lot tougher than, just looking at, oh, that's a good defense. That's a good defense. I told you to pick up the Ravens last week and they lost and their defense didn't do much. The week before that, I've been riding the Vikings defense because they were a top 5 defense. They were getting turnovers and they are 0-2 the last 2 weeks. So it might be tough. And then surprisingly, I have the Giants defense on the bench and I kept laughing every time I looked at the app. I'm like, why the fuck do I have the Giants? Well, they have 30 plus sacks this year and they're number 2 on fantasy stats for a defense. So don't look past the Giants. They might lose a ton of games, but that defense puts up points.
I told you last week, Sparky. What did I
Vikings-
tell you?
The Vikings got me 2 points.
That's what I'm saying. I told you, start the Giants, dude. I'm telling you, this Giants team may have a shitty quarterback, but they don't have a bad team, man.
No, I didn't let him go. I haven't let him go. And if you are searching for somebody, I'm gonna go with the same thing I've been going since this video started. Is the Saints defense against the Carolina Panthers? If you can get a defense that plays the Panthers every week, then do it.
Just do it.
Because you're gonna get at least 10 points. I promise.
You know what? In that, you ain't wrong, Spark. You're not wrong at all. This offense of the Carolina Panthers can't put anything together. They have the most injuries, I think, in the league, or at least the biggest players on their team, and they're already starting the fire sale. I'm waiting for Thielen to be shipped out next. God only knows if Bryce Young's going to be there by the time the trade deadline hits, but I have to agree with you, Spark, man. Anybody who's playing the damn Panthers at this point, just grab them. Just grab them. Hey, it's the team to play.
Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and it is Crown Jewels week, so I know we'll have a video to predict and preview the next this Saturday's PLE, which I'm fucking pumped to see.
It's going to be a great PLE.
I'm not going to say anything until Burdick finishes Raw, but just catch us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and have a good weekend.
Peace out.